If you value freedom, small government, personal responsibility, and the importance of free enterprise, then you'll want to know about Northwood University. Northwood stands out as a beacon for innovative thinking and ethical leadership, preparing students to thrive in a global free market economy. Rooted in the Northwood idea philosophy, this university fosters critical thinking, open dialogue, and the entrepreneurial spirit needed to lead and succeed. Discover your potential at Northwood University, where freedom and education come together to create free enterprise leaders who drive global economic and social progress. Visit northwood.edu. Hi, everybody. This is Saad. Today, I've got a truly fantastic evolutionary behavioral scientist. I was going through Dario's research, and I thought it's as if this guy's in my brain. All of the things that interest me, he's gone out and even done a better job at doing the research. So it's a big honor to. I'm putting my glasses on because your last name is difficult for a non-Italian. Dario Maestripieri. How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Professor of Comparative Human Development, Evolutionary Biology, and Neurobiology at the University of Chicago. Currently, you're serving as the editor-in-chief of Evolutionary Behavioral Sciences. Your books include Science Meets Literature, which is a literary Darwinism book, Games, Primate Play, Animal Personalities, Maternal Effects in Mammals, Machiavellian Intelligence, and I was one of the dumb guys who thought, how could he make such a typo in his title, until I realized that it's actually, you're talking about intelligence of macaques.
You would not believe how many people thought it was a typo.
I actually, when I was entering it, I fixed it into Machiavellian. I said, something is up. I went back and I said, okay, I'm an idiot. Primate psychology and evolutionary theory and primate behavior. Anything else we need to add to your bio before we delve into the stuff?
No, thank you. That's plenty.
Okay. So I guess first thing, whenever I have an evolutionary, scientist on my show, I like to start off with what was your evolutionary epiphany? So most of us who become, evolutionary minded scholars can point to the episodic memory. This is what I first was exposed to when I said, oh my God. In my case, it was reading first semester as a doctoral student at Cornell, reading the book by Martin Daly and Margot Wilson called Homicide. That was it for me. What's your epiphany, Dario?
So as a child, living in Italy with my parents, I must have been like 7 or 8 years old. I came across a book written by Austrian ethologist Konrad Lorenz. The book was called On Aggression, and it was about the evolution of aggressive behavior in animal and humans. And I thought, this is so exciting and interesting. I love these explanations. I love this approach. And so at the age of 7 or 8, I decided I want to become a professor. I want to do this type of research. I want to understand how evolution has shaped the human mind and human behavior. So that was it.
Wow, it's amazing that you said at the age of 7 or 8. My epiphany with Homicide was much later. I was in my mid-20s. But when I was roughly your age at the time, I also said, I was only interested in two things in my life, Dario, in terms of what I wanted to be. One was to be a professor, and at a very young age, because I was very much into books and thinking and so on. The other, which you can appreciate as an Italian, I wanted to be a professional soccer player. There were several obstacles that didn't allow me to achieve that goal. One was a very bad injury. Two, living in Montreal, Canada, did not make it easy in the late 70s and early 80s as a teenager to make it. But luckily, I did end up becoming a professor, so I can chat with people like you. So you always knew that academia and cerebral pursuits were in the cards for you.
Yes, I was a curious child. I loved reading books, and I liked using my mind. And a lot of people told me there were mysteries in life. So some people told me life is a mystery, human behavior is a mystery, religion is a mystery, and I never liked these explanations. I never liked the idea that some things we could never understand because they were mysterious. I thought that saying that something is a mystery is basically an indication that we're ignorant about it. And so to me, that was an encouragement, an incentive to try and answer these questions. It turned out that life was not that much of a mystery. Human behavior is fascinating, but I wouldn't say it's mysterious. So we actually have answers to a lot of questions, and science has made a lot of progress.
Of all of the behavioral research that you've done, whether it be with our primate cousins or with human beings, what is the singular phenomenon? I mean, I'm sure there are many, but that has surprised you the most? The one that you said, holy moly, that I can't believe this is true.
Look, it's a hard question to answer. I love all the papers that I've published, all the topics that I've researched. Basically, all my papers are all my babies. You cannot ask me, do you love this baby more than another baby? No, I love them all the same. So it's an endless list of fascinating questions. So from the monkeys to the people, I mean, I can tell you about my current interest, but
Well,
even the interest that I no longer do work on, I don't regret spending time and effort researching those topics.
so what are some of the things that are keeping you up at night with excitement these days?
So I think one of the most striking things about human behavior is individual differences. I mean, we all are aware that there is human nature, that we all share some psychological and behavioral characteristics as a result of the fact that we're a member of the species Homo sapiens. But we're all different from one another. That is something I've discovered and explored. It's an endless journey of discovery. So when I discovered personality psychology, that happened quite late in my career. I thought that that finally helped me understand who I was. My parents, I understood my parents for the first time in my life. So I think the personality psychology should be taught in elementary school, at least the basics, because people go on with their lives without understanding who they are, and they get married and they don't understand their spouses, their children, and so on and so forth. But I think that you need to study and understand psychology through a step-by-step process. So I started out studying biology, animal behavior. I don't regret any of that. That was very foundational for my later interest in psychology. So I would recommend taking this more indirect approach and not just jump to the most subtle and sophisticated aspects of human behavior, such as individual differences of personality.
Right. Well, I love that you mentioned individual difference in personality, because that's one of the topics where one of the misconceptions about evolutionary psychology, which is that we solely focus on the cataloging of human universals, whereas I try to always remind certainly my students that evolutionary minded psychologists, or for example, behavioral ecologists a la Conrad Lawrence, we study also cross-cultural differences as adaptive responses, and including individual differences. And so, but you'll probably agree with me that even our colleagues who are not evolutionary minded will probably all think that all we do is look at human universals, yes?
Yeah, there's some misperception of what evolutionary psychology is and what we do. And in part, I think we are responsible for that because in the early days of evolutionary psychology, the emphasis was on human nature, on universality. I think it was necessary to emphasize that. I think that now we have a well-established notion of human nature. I mean, there's still the people who deny the existence of human nature, but they're just not willing to have a conversation about it, and there's no way to make them change their mind. But those of us who accept the concept of human nature, we also know that human nature is just a starting point, that interactions between genes and environment are so complex, and the outcomes are so different. And depending on who your parents are and when you grow up and what kind of experiences you have early in life and so on, there's so many potential endpoints, so many outcomes. And but again, it's not mysterious. I think the science has really shed light on this process. So I once read a book about personality, and there was a chapter and I discovered this chapter was about me, about people with my particular personality profile. And I thought, wow, how interesting that for 50 years I didn't know somebody had written a paper about me, and now here I am on the pages of this book.
When earlier we were discussing, what are some of the things that you find interesting, and you said, everything that I've done I find interesting. That's a good segue to a paper that I wanted to discuss with you that's particularly relevant in your role as editor-in-chief of a major evolutionary behavioral sciences journal. Do you know this paper, Dario, by the sociologist Davis, 1971? And the title of the paper is "That's Interesting!" exclamation point. Have you heard of this paper?
I do not know this paper. I don't.
Oh my God, Dario, I'm going to have to send it to you by email. So
Please,
this is a
please.
paper that I think all of your doctoral students should read. It's a paper where the sociologist was trying to argue, is there a way for us to quantify or find the language to talk about what constitutes interesting research, right? And you could see as an editor-in-chief that, because yes, you could talk about, well, this wasn't methodologically rigorous, you didn't cite the appropriate papers, the study didn't have internal or external validity. There's all kinds of things that a reviewer can criticize, but seldom do reviewers say, look, it's all gorgeous, but the topic sucks, which, by the way, much of my career as a reviewer, that was usually my criticism. Okay, so you did this incredibly elaborate study to show us that consumers who like a restaurant are more likely to return to the restaurant. Who the hell could have imagined that, right? And so what he basically did is he provided 12 criteria of what constitutes interesting research. And in all the cases, there's a surprise element, right? I thought that variable A causes variable B. It turns out that it's the opposite. It's variable B that causes variable A. So having said all this, is there a way that, whether you as putting on the hat of editor-in-chief or just as Dario scientist, what are the metrics that you might use that tickle your interestingness fancy?
So ultimately, it's a subjective issue. So whatever we find interesting from a research point of view is whatever, like you said, keeps us up at night in a particular time of our lives. And I've been fascinated by very different things. So at times it was some aspect of monkey behavior. At times it was human personality or physical attractiveness. The issue is, something stimulates our curiosity, and we want to know more about it. I am particularly interested and intrigued in questions that many people have asked before, but it's obvious that they haven't found an answer. So I'm interested in reviewing explanations that other scholars have provided for phenomena. And if I feel that essentially everybody has missed the target, to me, that's a strong temptation to jump into the arena and try to contribute. And so to me, finding the answer to a question that has not been answered before is irresistible. It's so finding these little holes, these little gaps, especially if a lot of people have spent time on it. I can give you an example of that.
Please.
So years ago, about 15 years ago, I read a book by labor market economist named Daniel Hammermesh. The book was about the so-called beauty premium in the labor market.
Yes.
So this economist, Hammermesh, spent his entire career studying this phenomenon of why attractive people make more money, they get promoted more quickly, they have all kinds of benefits and advantages, and has accumulated an impressive body of research, a lot of data. And so he wrote this book. I knew nothing about this topic before I read the book. The book is called Why Beauty Pays, something like that. It was published by Princeton University Press. So I read the whole book. The data were fascinating, very strong, but I thought even more striking was the explanation that the author of the book gave. And so he said, the benefits that are given to attractive people in the labor market are the result of biases against non-attractive people. So I thought, wait a minute. So attractive people get a benefit because others have a handicap. So I felt that this explanation was equivalent to saying half a glass is full because the other half is empty. You're not really explaining anything. And so here it was, I thought, some people have studied this phenomenon for years, and yet they haven't found a satisfactory explanation. And in my opinion, that was because they didn't have the right framework. So they were looking for sociological, psychological, economic explanations. But to me, the key was evolution. So when you speak about physical attractiveness, you speak about a biological phenomenon. So you have to look at evolution. So I couldn't resist. I had to jump in and find my own way through this body of research. And so I wrote a paper. It took me years to write it. It was published in Behavior and Brain Sciences. It was a Target article.
Oh, wow.
I got it out of my system. So I basically read all the research. There were three separate bodies of research, one in economics, one in social psychology, and then a more recent one in evolutionary psychology. But essentially, there was no communication between researchers in these fields. And essentially, there was no attempt to provide a systematic, comprehensive explanation for this phenomenon. And so I said, I'm going to give it my best shot. And so I did it. I don't know if it was the last word, but I felt that I was happy with the way I contributed to this field. And so that was it. So that was interesting, but also satisfactory to me to say something that, in my opinion, had not been said before.
Wow, great answer. So 2 points. Number one, that feeling that you got where you read the literature and said, wait a minute, I can provide a much better Darwinian-based explanation, basically describes my entire career, because that's all I've done, right? So, well, how are you studying things in the business school, personnel psychology and economic behavior and consumer behavior and entrepreneurship and leadership, and never do you invoke the word biology? Do we exist in the business school somewhere in an alternate universe where biology ceases to matter? And so really, you've just described my entire career. But I want to talk about your behavioral and brain sciences. So when I talk about sort of a bucket list of things that I want to do infinite number of things. I'm excited by everything. But in terms of just pure peer-reviewed academic papers, the place where I would love to publish a paper would be BBS. And let me just, I know you obviously know this, but for our viewers, they may not. It's a really unique structure. I mean, there are others that have sort of copied it, but there is one big target article, which, as Dario said, it's usually a broad, big, synthetic consilient. We're going to talk about consilience in a second, where you write this big piece, and then you invite all sorts of people, oftentimes from many different perspectives, to comment. And so there might be 30, 40 commentaries, and then the target authors will reply to that. And the entire issue is just that one piece. So if you really want to sink your teeth into a topic, for example, proximate and ultimate perspectives on empathy, who's Franz de Waal, I think you know him well. Well, yep. Go and read that paper. You're going to cover a lot about empathy, both from a proximate and ultimate level. So prior to you writing that BBS article, did you share my bucket list that you wanted a paper in that journal?
Yes, but only if I had something original and important to say about a topic for which there was a lot of interest. So I didn't think that anything that I studied was necessarily worthy of being published in BBS. For this particular topic, I thought there was enough interest. It was a topic that lent itself to interdisciplinary research. And so I had a lot of fun connecting studies done by economists to studies done by social psychologists, and then more recent research done by evolutionary psychologists. There was an interesting phenomenon of lack of communication, lack of agreement on definitions, confusion between explanations of different levels of analysis, so confusion between explanations of mechanism, explanations of function. So it's like you walk into a room and it's a little messy, and you would say, oh, this room would be beautiful, but you need to put things away. And so that's what I try to do, essentially tidy up the room and put things in order, and so that everybody could really understand what went on with regard to this topic and this question.
So two things you mentioned interdisciplinarity, which I want to talk about, and consilience, which I also want to talk about. And when I reached out to you a couple of months ago, it's because, I mean, you know this, but our viewers don't. I saw a call for papers in the journal that you're currently editing, serving as editor-in-chief, where, you know, it was about consilience. And I have to say that of all the books, I mentioned earlier, Homicide was one of the most, well, probably the most influential book to kind of launch my career in evolutionary psychology. The book by E.O. Wilson, late 90s, Consilience, blew my mind because I said, that's exactly how my brain thinks. So can you, for our viewers who don't know what consilience is, can you tell us about that and link it to interdisciplinarity?
Yes. So I should premise that my interests have changed over the years and have become broader and broader. So essentially, I started out with an interest in behavior, psychology, and then I became more interested in theories that we use to explain behavior, and then I became interested in ideas in general. So if you had to ask me, what is your current field, or how do you describe in a few words of your interest, I would tell you my current field of interest and work is the history of ideas.
Beautiful.
So I'm interested in where ideas come from, how they get modified sometimes as they transfer from one field into another, how different people at different historical periods work on these ideas. They're elaborated. Sometimes they're slightly misunderstood and misinterpreted, but transformed. They have a life of their own. Now, this field, studying ideas from a historical point of view, is quintessentially interdisciplinary. So ideas start someplace. They might start in science, and then they might end up in art, or they might start in philosophy and then end up in science. It's fascinating to track how ideas cross boundaries. They don't care about boundaries. Sometimes they last centuries, millennia, and so on and so forth. So as you know, there's currently a separation between scientific and humanistic approaches to scholarship. I think this is unfortunate. In fact, it's one of the most frustrating things about being an academic, the fact that there's boundaries, there's departments, there's different buildings that people inhabit, and they don't talk to each other. There is no common language. I find this very frustrating. Because my inclination would be essentially to be all over the place, to talk to anybody who has anything interesting to say, to read everything, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so recently there's been an attempt to bridge this gap, to bring together approaches and fields that were separated for too long, such as the sciences and the humanities. So E.O. Wilson, the Harvard University entomologist, was at the forefront of this attempt. As you mentioned, wrote this book called Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge, in the 1990s. And it was a plea for scientists and humanists to start talking together and to look for general theories that could be applied across disciplines. The book was in part well received by people who essentially shared Wilson's views, but there was also a strong negative reaction to it because Wilson, as we all know, had his own way of doing things. He had a very forceful kind of take no prisoner approach, which in some cases has the effect of moving a field forward to force people to think about things that they hadn't thought before, but it also makes people defensive. And so there was a very strong defensive reaction by people in the humanities who thought this was not a genuine attempt at integration. It was an attempt at colonialism, basically. Yes. It was an attempt by scientists colonialism to colonize the humanities. So they resisted this invasion. I think this reaction was misplaced. And so in recent years, I've attempted to continue this effort. And I've taken a slightly different approach. So my approach has been not only to talk about what sciences can offer the humanities, but also what humanities can offer the sciences.
Very nice. Yes. I mean, for those of you who don't know, so I think the first book that I mentioned that you had written, where you were applying, a scientific lens to study literature, I don't know how much the field has grown, but certainly about 15, 20 years ago, there were a few people who were really getting into Darwinian literary criticism. There was Jonathan Gottschall. There was, well, I think David Sloan Wilson did an edited book on it. Do have some of the literary critics come around to the idea of understanding these universal literary themes via an evolutionary lens, or does it still remain a very boutique niche subdiscipline?
So I think that approach and the field and the people working in that area have moved forward. I think that there's been the realization that using the evolutionary approach to the study of literature is just one example of taking a broader interdisciplinary approach. So it doesn't have to be just evolutionary biology or psychology. It can be science. It can be physics. It can be psychology. Or it can also be philosophy. So I think the way to really push this approach forward is to make it broader. So essentially, I've decided that it's better to frame this effort in terms of consilience. So interdisciplinarity, integration of scientific and humanistic approaches, and not focus specifically on literary Darwinism. So the analysis of literary text from an evolutionary perspective. I don't deny that that's a valuable approach, but I think it's more promising to promote that approach within a broader agenda of interdisciplinarity.
So if I were to restate what you said, what you're saying is, okay, the evolutionary framework could be one means by which we achieve consilience, but there are other frameworks that we could equally apply in the pursuit of consilience. Does that sound right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay,
Yes, I
beautiful.
would bring philosophy into the picture, history of science, comparative psychology. There's no reason why the only scientific discipline to be brought into the picture should be evolutionary psychology. So I think also from a practical point of view, people would get less defensive and that would be more open-minded and more accepting of this new approach.
Beautiful. So two things I want to say. I want to say something about interdisciplinarity in a second, but before that, when you started your response and talking about how where do ideas originate, how do they get modified, and so on, I'm presuming that you're familiar with the field of evolutionary epistemology, which is, I mean, it applies a Darwinian lens to the evolution of knowledge, and then a subfield of that, which I think you'd be familiar with. If not, I need to send you that as a link as well. Do you know the work of Dean Simonton looking at a Darwinian perspective on creativity, of which ideas would be one form? Are you familiar with that work?
Yes, I actually teach a course and in which we read some of Simonton's papers
Oh
on
my goodness.
creativity. Yes.
Oh, beautiful. Well, what I mean, do you support it? Do you disagree with it? Do you like it? Do you find it
Yeah,
useful?
I mean, there's different approaches to creativity. I think we should be familiar with all of them. My emphasis, as I discuss that topic with my students, is that there's basic similarities between creativity in the sciences and creativity in the humanities, creativity in arts. It would be a mistake to think that creative minds, say, in the arts, are qualitatively different than creative minds in the sciences. So I think that there's the need for a general theory of creativity and how it manifests itself in different disciplines. And I think evolutionary epistemology is very well positioned to provide that theory. So I think it's a very valuable approach.
Beautiful. I'm going to come back to interdisciplinary in a second, but you mentioned creativity in your response to my question about creativity. One of the things that I talk about in my latest book, my previous book on happiness. So at one point I'm talking about, what are the two decisions that you make in your life that are most likely to impart great happiness or great misery if you make the wrong choice. And I argue one is, of course, your choice of spouse, and two,
I was about to say that. You read my mind.
and two is your choice of profession. And I argue, and given the little that I know of you, but I see how creative you are and how curious you are, I think you probably agree with this statement, that I argue that all other things equal, if the profession that you choose is one that allows you to instantiate your creative impulse, you're well on your way to climbing occupational happiness. So, but now that doesn't mean it's only through being an academic creator, right? You could be a chef, you could be an architect, you could be a stand-up comic. Each of those professions are creating in a completely different medium, in a completely different domain. But until I came along, that plate, that dish didn't exist. Until I came along, that bridge didn't exist. Until I came along, that book didn't exist. And immersing myself in the creative process is the most direct way to achieve purpose and meaning. What do you think of that theory?
Look, I've made a number of bad decisions in my life, decisions that turned out to be wrong, but not about my career. The decision that I made about my career to become a professor, to do research, that was a good one. I was born to do this. I'm happy. I've enjoyed every day of my life. When I retire, essentially my life will not change one bit because I will continue doing the same things. I will continue to think, to read, and to write. Essentially, I've been ready to retire for decades. If I had been told that, you will retire at 40, I'd say, fine, I will have more time to do what I want to do, to work. If I was told, okay, we're going to lock you up in a library and all you can do is read books and write, I'll say, fine, I would be happy.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
it's exactly how I feel. By the way, you can't see, but around me, I'm in my home study. I'm surrounded by a million books in my personal library. And one of the greatest sources of angst in my life, Dario, is am I going to have life be long enough that I actually read all the books in my study? Because I can't bear the thought that all of the knowledge in the books that I've yet to read are not in my brain. I'm sure
I,
you.
I think you will. You will. And some
Thank you.
books don't need to be read from cover to cover. But I think at some point in the next 30 years of your life, you will pick up every book from your shelves and you will read at least a few pages. And so
Thank you,
don't
doctor.
worry.
That means a lot to me. Okay, interdisciplinarity. I'm going to link the pursuit of interdisciplinarity, or rather the obstacle of pursuing it, to when I think you mentioned Conrad Lawrence originally. Yes?
Yes, yes.
So Conrad Lawrence, as you know, but some of our viewers may not know, talked about territoriality as sort of
Hmm.
an ethological principle. So I don't know if you know
Hmm.
where I'm going with this. So interdisciplinarity is something that every university president says that we are all about interdisciplinarity. But then when it comes to you implementing interdisciplinarity, everyone becomes a Lawrence territorial being and says, no, 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 I don't want these bastards in the other building to come into my territory, right? And now I know this firsthand, well, first because my career has been driven by interdisciplinarity, but I try to implement, Dario. Do you know the EVOS program that David Sloan Wilson had set up at SUNY Binghamton? Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't.
But you've heard of, you know who David Sloan Wilson is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
know him.
So David Sloan Wilson had set up the EVOS program, which is, I think, Evolutionary Studies program, which was a minor that any students could take at the university because you basically could study politics from an evolutionary perspective, or medicine, or engineering, right? And so it was the quintessential interdisciplinary program. And the first one that I'm aware of was the one that he had set up at SUNY Binghamton. So he had come to visit my university, I think back in 2009, and I had told him, you know what, I at the time I had a shared professorship in evolutionary behavioral sciences. I said, I'm going to set up the first Canadian-based EVOS program in Canada. And so I went to all of the deans in all of the faculties, and they all turned into Lawrence territorial defense guy. No, no, no. So I said, well, how is it that from this side of your mouth you talk about interdisciplinary, but from this side you do the exact opposite? Is this something that you have faced in your career?
Of course. So I was drawn to academia because the thought of engaging in the pursuit of knowledge and truth, I thought there could be nothing more important and more exciting than that. Devote myself to studying, learning, and figuring things out. And I thought academia would be a community of same-minded scholars who are just in this business to pursue knowledge and truth. So how can we not get along with each other? How can we not love each other? So I did not realize that the pursuit of knowledge and truth happens to be a human activity. So anything that we do, we bring human nature to it. So we bring our
The
territoriality.
frailties of human nature.
Absolutely. And so, so whether you're doing science or art history or economics, you are a human being with all your flaws, all your biases, all your, you know, your peculiarities, and we have to accept that. So yes, even in academia, especially in academia, people are jealous of each other's work. They invest personally into what they write, what they produce. I've been shocked that in the past, some colleagues of mine that I dare to criticize in print. So very professionally, I wrote papers expressing the opinion that some positions that other people had taken were inaccurate. Oh, and I explained very professionally, very nicely why. And these people took it personally. I was shocked that because I thought that this is the way science works, you know, the battle of ideas, not the battle of people. I had no interest in battling people. I was just interested in confronting ideas. And to my surprise, some people stopped talking to me. Some people view me as an enemy for the rest of their life. It was very unfortunate. But that's the way it works. But I'm optimistic about the future. So I think if you make the first move and you reach out and offer something that others can use, it has to start from us. So you cannot expect that, you know, art historians or will come to you and say, oh, what can I learn from you from your approach? You have to go to them and tell them, listen, you have to pay attention to what I do, and this is why. This is why what we do has something to offer to you, but it has to start from us. And so I think not everybody will listen, but I'm optimistic. I also think that we need to educate students. So that's where it starts. So I teach a course essentially to open students' minds, to enlighten them about the importance of engaging with people from across the fence, so to speak. So if we catch them early, I think there's a good chance that if they become professors, they will have an open mind.
Well, I think University of Chicago is uniquely positioned as sort of an interdisciplinary place, right? So there's I think, is it the Mind Institute? And, you know, so there seem to be, I don't know how it seeped through the walls of University of Chicago, but it seems to do better on interdisciplinarity than other top schools. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't know. I don't know how you would quantify that. You know, compare different universities in terms of how well they do on interdisciplinarity. So one thing that is unique, or at least special about the University of Chicago, is the degree of freedom that we professors have in terms of pursuing our research interests or teaching the classes that we like. So I've never been told you should do research on this topic or teach a course on that topic. My interests have changed many times. I was basically hired to do something and then ended up doing something completely different, and there was not a peep, not a complaint. So that's amazing, knowing that there is essentially unlimited freedom to explore topics, as long as, of course, if you're productive and you are effective as a teacher, and you essentially play the game by the rules, which is you get funding, you write papers, books, you teach good courses. As long as you meet these basic expectations, you can do anything you want. That is priceless. So I'm very lucky to be at an institution that allows me to do this.
No, that's and to some extent, I would share what you just said about University of Chicago with my own university. It has many flaws. It tends to be rather super woke as universities go, and it's difficult for someone like me to survive in such an environment. But in terms of having given me complete and utter freedom to pursue anything that I wanted, they certainly have done that, and they deserve all the kudos for having done that. Quick question, not to kind of denigrate academia, but you know, we're two academics. I think we're almost the same age, so we've been at this game for a while. one of the things that has disappointed me in my colleagues, and I wonder if you share the sentiment. I mean, we are in a world of ideas where we are paid to play in the intellectual landscape. Yet I have found that many of my colleagues, while they are professional academics, are actually not intellectuals, meaning that I had this romantic idea that every Friday night I would be inviting all these brilliant academics, and my children would grow up listening to the art historian and the neuroradiologist and the primatologist at my house. And I found out that most academics are actually unbelievably non-intellectual. They are careerists. They play a game. And that has turned me off often from attending conferences where I'm coming. I think in speaking to you for very little, we seem to have a similar curiosity for life, where I'm a kid trying to play, and they're very much professional posers and ethology and so on. Has
Yes
that
and no.
disappointed you as well?
No, so I agree with you that not every professor is an intellectual, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they're not genuine in their interest or what they do, that they pose, that they're just interested in their career. I think there's different facets to scholarship and to academia. For example, if we just talk about science, one way to look at science is essentially an activity whose goal is to pose questions and to provide answers to these questions, right? So, and the questions can be anything. So anything that has not been investigated before, anything that looks interesting. As you know, there's basic science, what's funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. You don't have to justify the implications for society. It just has to be an interesting research question. And that's fine. That's one way in which science works. However, science also works to solve problems. So science was developed and has been used and will continue to be used to solve problems. So many scientists are trained not to engage in big questions, pursue abstract problems that seem interesting, but essentially they're trained to become problem solvers. Okay, so they taught some skills, and essentially much of their work will be to apply those skills to solve a problem. So they're more like on the technical side of things. And I don't mean to talk down on people who have more technical expertise. It's just another facet of the issue. So I'm more of a thinker. I'm more of a generalist. I'm not a specialist. I like synthesis more than analysis. And generally speaking, I'm not very good with my hands. So, if there's a problem in the bathroom, I call the plumber. I do not try to fix it myself.
You know who I call? I call my wife.
Okay, there you go. So you made the good choice, maybe, with your spouse. But I have a lot of respect for people who have knowledge, but also this knowledge is translated into skills and know basically how to fix problems or to improve society. And this is not just done in the sciences. I know that there's some of this activity, essential problem solving, also in the humanities, in every field, and that's okay. I think it's a matter of preferences. Like you, I would prefer to go to a dinner party where everybody's an intellectual, but sometimes I talk to scientists who just want to talk about the latest procedure that they developed in some sophisticated experiment that they've done. So they just want to describe technical activities, and they like that. And there's no way to get them to talk about something abstract or some. For example, in a previous life, I used to see myself as a biologist, but because I had a certain idea of biology, the study of life. No biologist this day will tell you that they study life. Biology is a different thing, which is fine. So in the US and North America, biology is mostly problem solving. So you get trained to acquire some skills that will then be applied to solve problems, and that's fine.
So basically, E.O. Wilson would not have passed that measure of what a biologist is today in the United States.
Absolutely. E.O. Wilson would never get a job in a biology department.
Exactly.
And neither would I. And neither would I.
Right. But so what I want to ask you next is, so I mean, you kindly accepted to come on this program. It's a way to communicate science to the masses. I think most professors still remain very hesitant to get out of their very narrow mediums of communication. I publish papers and peer-reviewed papers, that's it. Oh, in some fields, you may be allowed to publish books, but in many fields, that doesn't count as anything. Well, oh, on the origin of species, that's a book. It's not a peer-reviewed paper. It must be garbage. We don't want to hear it. You're not going to get tenure. So in your case, I mean, certainly you've written books that are meant for a broader public, so you have that bent. Do you feel that in the future there'll be greater reward mechanisms set up for people to do exactly what we're doing here as part of the hats you wear as a professor?
I think there are already. I think there are more opportunities to do this than there were before, and there are more rewards. And so there are many people who have invested significantly and successfully into essentially outreach. So doing podcasts, doing interviews, have a significant presence online. So there's two issues here. One is an issue of values. So some people, like you, I'm sure, and I to some extent, believe that it's very valuable to share the results of your work, to share your research, your knowledge, your wisdom with others. So our job is not simply to stay in the ivory tower, solve the problems, learn stuff, and then teach, and that's it. So some of us think that part of our job is also to share our knowledge, our intuitions, our insight with the general public. Others maybe don't have this value as high on the priority list. The other issue is an issue of temperament. Some people temperamentally are more inclined to engage with the public, to speak in front of an audience, to speak on video. Others are not. So some of us are a little shy, a little introverted. We get uncomfortable when we are asked to speak publicly about our work, and that's fine. Again, we're human beings. We have our personality preferences. I don't think that people, everybody necessarily should be forced out of their comfort zone. So I think there's plenty of room for both types, those that find it easy and rewarding and enjoyable to speak with the public, and those who find it a little stressful, and that's fine.
What a diplomatic answer. That I could see why you are editor-in-chief of a journal, because that's how
No, it has nothing to do with that.
So what are some things that we're coming to I'm trying to look at the time and be mindful of your time. What are some projects that you're currently working on? It could be, I'm setting up a new podcast, I'm setting up a new institute, here's the next book I'm working on, that you might want to take this opportunity to share with us. Take it away, Dario.
So I've got a couple of book projects, but they're kind of standby for the moment because they're very ambitious. And each would take, I think, maybe 10 years to be completed. So one is about applying an evolutionary approach to issues of knowledge and truth. So the question is, from an evolutionary point of view, it's not always advantageous to be knowledgeable. Sometimes it's more advantageous to be ignorant. And even truth is not, from a biological evolutionary point of view, absolute value. Sometimes believing something that is false might be more beneficial. So I think there is a way to apply an evolutionary and an economic cost-benefit analysis to issues of knowledge and ignorance and truth and falsehood, to see in what situations it is advantageous and beneficial to embrace knowledge and truth, and in what situations instead it's better not to know or to believe something that is not true. So that's one project. Another project is related to those interests that I was describing earlier about the history of ideas and interdisciplinary scholarship. So there's a particular literary genre called the novel of ideas. So this was a genre that was popular, especially at the end of the 19th century, especially in Europe. But essentially, these were novels written by intellectuals who were very interested in scientific or philosophical questions. They just happened to be writing fiction, and so they wrote novels to explore scientific or philosophical ideas. I find that fascinating. When I first came across some of these novels, I thought, this is what I really want to concentrate on. So use art, essentially literature, to explore scientific or philosophical ideas. So the book project is essentially a history of the novel of ideas. So when this literary genre first appeared, how it changed over time, the different versions that existed, and why it's not so popular anymore. Again, this is a lifetime project. Nobody's done it. So again, there is the need for something like this, but it's very ambitious. Luckily, I have a co-author who's far more knowledgeable on this than I am. So
what would be an exemplar of that literary genre?
Thomas Mann, the German novelist, his famous novel, The Magic Mountain, is essentially a novel of ideas about, Enlightenment and Marxism and the crisis of Western Europe and Western civilization, so big ideas like that. But also Franz Kafka wrote novels of ideas. One of the best examples of novels of ideas is actually a poorly known book written by Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World. He used to be one of the most visible intellectuals in Europe and also in North America, and then he was kind of a little forgotten, and now people remember him just for Brave New World, or because he wrote a book about psychedelics, I think. But he actually wrote a very well-written and very powerful, serious novel of idea called Point PowerPoint. No, sorry, it's Point Counterpoint. Point Counterpoint. So there is a musical theme to it because it's a sort of a musical expression. So this is a book about ideas, about different worldviews, different philosophical or scientific views. There are 4 main characters in the book, and each represents a different view of the world, and they engage in these very serious conversations. And the whole theme is actually framed as a symphony. So these 4 protagonists and their ideas essentially are meant to represent the first violinist in an orchestra. So the main violin players, and then there is other musicians who don't get as much stage time, they don't play as much, and all the different exchanges, the conversations, the ideas are meant to represent musical exchanges. Beautiful. If you haven't read it, you must read it.
Point Counterpoint.
Correct.
Would George, I know we're coming to the end of the thing, but the way you were describing this literary genre, what triggered in my head was, would George Orwell and Ayn Rand be manifestations of that literary genre?
Yes and no. So there is no universal definition of what a novel of ideas is. So anything potentially can fit into that. The way I use this expression, I mainly refer to novels that were inspired by either philosophical or scientific ideas. But one can talk about ideas about politics, about society. Even science fiction can be used as a vehicle for ideas. So anyway, these novels are not so common anymore. Maybe one of the most recent examples of these novels of ideas was a book that became very popular in the 1970s and 80s called The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. That is a novel of ideas. So you can read it just as an interesting story, a love story, but there's a lot of philosophical.
I think it was turned into a film, wasn't it?
There was also a film, yes. The film mostly focused on the actions and not so much on the ideas, but the book is actually a very serious and ambitious intellectual effort.
Wonderful. Dario, I was expecting to have a great conversation. You've exceeded my expectations. Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun.
It really was. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Cheers.